Amen. I'm glad y'all are here this morning. You remembered the time change. My wife, a while back, got me one of these very fancy clocks with the numbers on them are this big because I'm like totally blind. I don't even get out of bed without putting my glasses on. And this is one of those that I can see without squinting, right by the bed, right? It's very fancy, and it changes the time by itself when there's a time change. But I haven't had it all that long. So last night before I went to bed, I moved my clock up an hour. And guess what happened at 2 a.m.? So I get up and get all ready, and I'm ready for the morning. And I'm like, Brandon said he wanted to be at the church early. Isn't he doing a great job, by the way? Yes. He said him and Tim wanted to come to church early to get ready. And so I'm like, man, he better hurry up. So I go and shake him. Boy, you better hurry up. It's 7:15. You said you wanted to be there at like 7:30 today. Man, Tim said he was going to set the alarm. Wait a second. Dad, did you wake up to your alarm? Yeah. That's got that thing in it that sets it up by itself. And so he got to go back to bed for a little while, but at 6:15, I was ready to go. So it feels like 9 o'clock in the morning to me. But I'm glad you all are here today. Very glad. And I believe beyond any doubt that God is going to be faithful to say something that each and every single one of us need to hear. I don't know what point in the sermon that's going to be for you, but I believe beyond any doubt today, he's going to do his dead level best to make it impossible for any of us to get out of here without knowing that we've heard from him. Typically, their dinner table was characterized by all kinds of noise, laughter, and stories and conversations that was sometimes silly and sometimes serious, but always quite lively. That was what characterized this dinner table, where they always had their places where they sat at the same. Like at my house, I sit at this end of the table on the head, and Brandon, the oldest son, sits down at this end, and Michelle and Blake are here, and Brooke is right here. And if you want to mess things up at our house, just go sit in the wrong seat. And it's going to be like, it's on then. What are you doing sitting in my seat? Well, the way I envisioned this story, they had their places at the table as well. And it was always lively, always fun. But on this particular night, the noise and the joy was replaced with an awkward silence. Instead of pouncing on their food the way they normally did, each person around the table was just kind of picking at it. And it didn't quite taste the same. Same recipe, same way it had been made the time before in this family's one of their favorite meals, but it just didn't taste quite the same. And the problem was not the food that was on the table. The problem was the dynamic of the family that was around the table. The problem was one of those seats was empty. And it wasn't empty for a good reason. Like, I remember the first few meals after Brandon left for college. And those of you who have had college students, you understand what that's like when there's a place at the table that's usually full and now it's empty. It just kind of throws off the whole balance of everything. It wasn't for a good reason like college. It wasn't a noontime meal where a stay-at-home mom is home with 3 kids and one of those is old enough to finally go to school and they're all happy and excited, but it's just weird the first time they're not at the table. It wasn't for a good reason like that. It wasn't for a reason of success. Like the person missing at the table was the breadwinner, the dad who had just gotten a promotion that now involved a lot more travel than it typically involved. And now they're having to eat more meals without him. But it's for a good reason. It wasn't like that. And it wasn't because in service of their country, somebody was going to be going away for a year. It wasn't for a reason like that at all. In fact, the reason that this seat at their family table was empty was not because the person who typically occupied it had to be somewhere else. It was because they wanted to be anywhere but there. And when the chair is empty, not because it has to be, but because the person just doesn't want to be there, that's a different kind of empty altogether. It put everything out of balance. It was what was normal was no longer normal. But you all know that anytime circumstances change, it's an opportunity for new routines to be developed, right? And it started not necessarily with him thinking this is going to be my new routine, but it became that. For the first meal, they're seated at the table and everybody else is there, and the dad comes in and he stands with his hands on the back of the chair and he looks at that empty seat and he pauses for a moment. He makes his way around the house to the very front room where there's a very large picture window that has this great view of a very long driveway. And he stands there and looks down the driveway with a very lingering look and a longing heart, wondering if maybe the boy didn't get so far away, but he might turn around and come right back before they even have their first meal without him. So he lingers with that longing look to no avail. So he goes back around, makes his way through the hallways of the house, back to the dinner table. He sits down, and they pick at their meal. That was actually to become a routine for him. Not just at mealtime, but he couldn't quite find himself going through that front room without pausing by the window. Every time he went by, he'd stop and he'd look out there. That very long drive, he would give a much longer look with the longing that only comes from the heart of a father who longs for his son to come home. And it wasn't one of those deals where he did it for a few days and then, the next week it was only, maybe 5 times instead of 6. And the week after that, it's down to 3. And then, the weeks turned into months and the months started piling up on themselves and he found himself hardly walking by that window with even a thought of it. It wasn't like that at all. The longer he went, the more burdened he became. And the more impossible it was to pass through that room without looking out that window, hoping beyond all hope that this would be the day that the boy would come home. He couldn't stop thinking about him. And he could not resign himself to the fact that that chair and his heart would forever be empty. He refused to accept that. Big brother, on the other hand, did not think about little brother out sowing his wild oats when they sat down at the table. He thought about him after the meal, whenever he had to not only wash the dishes, but dry them too. He thought about it when summer hit and the rotation was all out of whack now because it wasn't mow the grass this week and brother's turn next. It was I mow the grass every week. He thought about it when he was out doing chores, when the brother's absence resulted in twice as much work for me. He had all kinds of thoughts about his brother, and none of them were very kind. He too imagined the day when his brother might come home and getting his arms and hands wrapped around that scrawny punk's little neck to teach him a lesson or two. That's what he thought of. In fact, the longer the boy was gone, the more resentful his brother grew. Not just towards him, but towards their dad. In fact, every time that dad would come in and put his hands on the back of that chair and then pause and make his way through the house and go stand looking out at that long driveway with an even longer look and the longing heart of a father who was desperate for his son to come home, the other boy would be sitting at that table just seething with anger. Why can't he just be happy? Why can't he be as happy that I'm here as he is sad that my brother is gone? And he was mad. He was bitter. He was angry. He was frustrated. And his whole attitude was, if he wants to be somewhere else, let him stay there. Who cares? Who cares if he ever comes back? And that's kind of the family dynamic that was going on at a table that used to be filled with joy and smiles and laughter and jokes and poking fun at each other and conversations that were sometimes silly and sometimes serious. It was all different now. Isn't it amazing how the dynamics of a family unit can change when things change with just one person? And so that was their routine. Day after day, that father would stop and look, and he would gaze out that window, hoping beyond all hope that today would be the day that boy was coming home. And then finally, it was the day that changed everything. He goes by that window. He looks off in the distance. So far, he can just barely see. He looks like he's this tall, but it's a silhouette that he recognizes. Much smaller than it was before. He looks scrawny even from that great distance, and his gait is much slower, but it's the same gait as that boy. And he stood there looking. It wasn't the first time he envisioned that. In fact, there had been several times before where his head and his heart had teamed up on him against his eyes and led him to believe that something was there that really wasn't. But this time, there were no tricks going on at all. He looked, and as soon as he saw that boy, his heart began to pound, and his heart began to pound within him, and his feet began to pound under him. He didn't stand at that door and say, "You just wait till you get home. I'm going to be coming up with a big long list of stuff you're going to have to do to get back in my good graces." He didn't say, "What goes around comes around." He didn't say, "What's that boy expect to get now that he's coming home?" He literally took off running down that long drive, past the end of the concrete, into the dirt, and kept on going. And he kept running until he met up with that son, this old man now drenched with sweat and tears streaming down his face. He grabs hold of that boy. He hugs him. He kisses him. And the kid can't believe it. He thinks he's going to get a beat down, and instead he gets a gracious welcome home. Dad puts his arm around him, and the two walk arm in arm all the way back to the house. And when they get there, he starts giving orders to the servants and the hired help. "Hey, whatever it was on the menu for tonight, scratch that. We're going to celebrate. Whatever it was, that was a meal for our sustenance. And sustenance and celebration are two very different things. It is time for us to have a party. Get the steak. I mean some filet mignon. Bring some T-bones. I want some prime rib, medium rare. I mean, it is going to be good. Break out all the desserts. I mean, every dessert we got in this house, you find it. Tell the neighbors to come. Strike up the band. Get that rockin' band from down the street and tell them we want them to come to our house tonight because we're having a party, and it is going to be great." And there's a scurry and a flurry of activity all over that house that's been absent for a very long time. But everybody's getting in on the act now. I mean, they're setting tables and cleaning stuff up and putting stuff in the closet so people can't see, when you get company right away. Like, yeah, y'all do that. I know you do. And the meal is getting prepared. But meanwhile, the older brother's been out on the back 40 mending fences. Boy, does he have a lot of fences to mend. He makes his way towards the house, and he can see all this flurry of activity, and he doesn't know what's going on. He makes his way into the barn to drop off some tools and says, "What's going on?" And one of the servants says to him, "Your brother, he's back. And your dad, you can't believe how happy your dad is. We're having a party. I'm out here getting the fatted calf right now. I mean, it's going to be big. The neighbors are coming. The band's going to be striking it up. Oh, it's going to be great." And the brother said, "Party? For that no good punk brother of mine who took our dad's money and went off with wild living? We heard some reports about what he was doing, tarnishing the family name, wasting everything and craziness, and dad's going to throw a party for him? They can have that party all they want to, but you won't find me in there." Well, everybody back at the house was busy getting everything ready. And finally the meal was prepared. And they put every leaf in the table so it was as long as they could get it. Brought in a few extras so there would be a place for everybody to sit. Dad, ready to just rejoice over this boy who had come back, goes to put his hands on the back of the chair. It's a habit now. He just does it. And he looks, and there's another empty chair. So he wonders, did he get stuck in the field? Does he need help? Is there a problem? So he does what the father does. He goes back out to that front room, and he looks out the window, and sure enough, he sees the boy there, which he kind of expected because he knew him. Good father knows their boys and girls. And he knew that it would be very unlike him to ever go very far away from home. He knew that younger one had a wild streak in him that caused him to go do his sinning as far and wide, as long as he could go. But the older one, he didn't do any less sinning. He just always chose to do his sins pretty close to home. So he looks out there, and sure enough, there he is. So the father did what fathers do. He went outside. And it wasn't very long before he realized that the boy wasn't out there because he had to be, like he was finishing up a job or he had a problem with something. He wasn't absent from the table because he had to be. He wasn't there. He had an empty seat because he wanted to be anywhere but there. And that makes for a different kind of emptiness altogether. The conversation was really interesting. Dad said, we're going to have this party. I really want you to come in. And immediately all that seething anger came out. And he said, that son of yours doesn't deserve any party. I can't believe you're doing this for him. You've never done anything like that for me. I've been good. I've done everything you've asked me to do. I've stayed right here. I haven't gone away. I haven't tarnished the family name. I've never done any of that. And you've never so much as had a little party for me and my friends to celebrate. And now for him, this son of yours, you're having a party? And the father says, we're having a party for this brother of yours. And I think that that's very intentional. That he doesn't say, I'm having this party for my boy. He says, we're having this party for your brother. Don't forget, he is your brother. So I want you to come on in and join the party. This story is, isn't that a great, that's Jesus' story. He tells it in Luke chapter 15. If you have your Bibles, I do want to read it. Even though I've told it, I want to read it too. Luke chapter 15, we're going to read verses 1 through 3 to kind of let you see who the audience is that Jesus is talking to. And then we'll skip over to verse 11. Once you found your spot, if you could stand for the reading of the word, that'd be great. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus. So we got sinners and tax collectors and rough and wayward people and sons and daughters that have run away from home to go find out what the world has to offer. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, this man welcomes sinners and eats with them. Then Jesus told them this parable, verse 11. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, Father, give me my share of the estate. So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am, starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. So he got up and went to his father. But while he was a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. Your brother has come, he replied, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he has him back safe and sound. The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fatted calf for him. My son, the father said, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. This is the word of the Lord. Isn't that a great story? Man, I love that story. What I don't like about it is that there's a loose end. Jesus leaves us hanging. And the loose end is we don't know what the brother did. Did he come in? Did he stay out? What did he do? We simply are not told. And maybe the reason for that is that maybe he wants us to provide the ending to the story. There's lots of options that the guy had, right? I mean, one of them is he could have said, I'm staying outside. Dug his heels in, nursed his grudges and bitterness and anger and resentment, and said, nobody is going to take that away from me. They can party all they want to, but they can do it without me. Of course, he wouldn't be the only one who ever had that kind of reaction. Because there are a lot of people who've had brothers and sisters and sons and daughters and moms and dads and aunts and uncles, friends and co-workers who've done what they shouldn't have done or not done what they should have, and the consequences have fallen on us. And every time the weight of that consequence falls on us again and again and again and again, what can happen is the anger and the bitterness and the resentment can begin to seethe within us as well. So that even when maybe they do start to get a few things right, we find ourselves unable and unwilling to celebrate with them at all. And I guess we can do that. He could have. He could have just said, go on and have your party. I'm staying here. That's one option. You know, another option that he could have had was to look at what treatment his brother got when he got back home and say, man, if that is the only consequence for going out, sowing your wild oats, living wild, doing whatever you want, is having a party when you get home, why don't I just do the same thing? He had his turn, I'll take mine. If that's the way the Father responds, I will be presumptuous about his kindness and do whatever I want to do. Of course, he wouldn't be the only one who's ever done that either. Of folks who have made a conscious decision, I'll come back home later, but for now, I'm going to go do life my own way. I'm going to party and have fun, and I'll have time later, and maybe you will, and maybe you won't. I'll just presume that I will have that opportunity on my terms to go back when I want to go back. And when I do, the Father will be obligated to throw a big old party for me. And there are people in our world today and in churches this very morning who are living a life making presumptions about the grace of God. He could have done that. Or he could have gone into the party like this. People doing here anyway. Free meal from my dad, that's all they want. I'm waiting for my right opportunity. The meal was done, the dancing began, the band was playing. They were playing his favorite song, and he went up and grabbed the microphone and said, whoa, 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 can I have everybody's attention for just a second? Aren't we all glad that my brother has come home? Oh yeah, cheers and celebration. Come on up here, boy. Puts his arm around him, shoves the microphone in his face and says, why don't you go ahead and tell us all the details of what you were doing while you were gone? With an attempt to embarrass his already defeated brother. Of course, he could have done that, and sometimes we choose to do that too, don't we? I mean, they need to get some sense of justice here, right? That coworker, that brother, that sister, that parent, that aunt, that uncle, that friend, that cousin, that whoever that did what they shouldn't have done or didn't do what they should have, they need to come clean with it. And I will feel much better if everybody in the world knows what they did. They need to know. They need to come clean. And if somebody in a position of authority won't make them come through with that, I'll be the one to do it. Yeah, I'll go into the party. He could have done that. A lot of options of what that boy might have done when the father went out, inviting him to come into the party. Another option is that he could have sat there and thought about it a while. And allowed the heart of the Father to become his heart. To the point where the joy that the father had that the brother came home became the joy that the older brother had that his brother had come back. He could have waited until the words of the Father carried their weight all the way into the depths of his soul, and then gone into that party with a renewed mind and a different attitude altogether, having experienced a change of heart to say, I'm so glad he's back. I'm so glad you all have come. Let's celebrate. Let's rejoice. Oh, isn't it great that this brother has returned? He was dead. He is alive, just like the Father said. He was lost, but now he is found. He could have done that. He could have stayed outside. He could have gone off and living wild. He could have gone and embarrassed his brother, or he could have allowed the heart of the Father to become his heart. We don't know what he did. He leaves it open-ended, but we do know what we will do. And maybe we know what we have done. Our service this morning is going to move us towards the same kind of scene that takes place at the end of Jesus' story. A table, a feast, where we celebrate the fact that God made a way for us to find our way back home when we had no way home. We're going to rejoice over these sacred symbols of bread and cup that represent the body and the blood of Jesus. And we're going to say, thank you, God, that when we were far from home, you came looking for us. Amen. That's reason to celebrate right there. Yeah. Absolutely. And at this table, which really isn't ours, it's God's table, at this table, I want you to hear some good news today. There's a seat at this table with your name on it. And Christ himself will be our host in just a few minutes. And if he comes to this table and finds some folks that are still outside the room, I have a pretty good idea where the Father's going to be. Whether you are the younger son or daughter who has been living wild and crazy, and you were living wild and crazy last night. The instant that you were taking one step towards him, I want to tell you something, he was already running for you. Like this. And if you're the older brother who's maybe been around, he's telling this to the sinners who he's given some hope to, but he's telling it to the Pharisees that need a little bit of correction because you know what? They become the older brother. We've had all right together for a long time. How come these other people can't get, come on? They became arrogant and proud and self-centered. And there's more than one way to be self-centered. You can do it far away, or you can do it real close to home too. And if we find ourselves in the shoes of an older brother refusing to grant mercy and forgiveness when God has given that to us, I know where the Father's going to be with you too. He's going to be doing what dads do. He's going to come look out the window, and when he sees you sitting outside, he's going to come and say, hey, I really want you to be a part of what we're doing here. And we have an opportunity right now to sit and let the powerful words of a loving Father soak down deep into our soul so that his heart becomes our heart.